Over the course of the summer, we have watched with horror as thousands more have died in Syria and Iraq. And the debate over what we should do about it has been omnipresent here in the Senate and in the House. We've held hearings. We've gone on television to tell our story of how we should respond. We've talked about it here on the floor of the Senate and the House. Similarly, we've watched a conflict continue to persist in eastern Ukraine, with maybe not the numbers of casualties that we've seen in Syria and Iraq, but similar death and destruction. And we have responded with a vigorous debate about what we should do on the floor of the Senate. Again, hearings in committees, letters to the president, bipartisan pieces of legislation that have been proposed as to how the United States would seek to reduce the amount of casualties in a place like eastern Ukraine, as we are debating what our response should be on Syria and Iraq. But what if I told you that this summer 4,000 people died in another conflict in which there was absolutely no debate here in the Congress? What if I told you that there were 4,000 people that died this summer in a conflict that not a single committee in the Congress held a hearing on? What if I told you that there was a conflict this summer in which 4,000 people perished, and there isn't a single member of the majority party in the House and the Senate who have proposed any comprehensive way to deal with it? Here are the numbers on a daily, monthly, and annual basis that are killed by guns in this country. On average, 86 a day, 2,600 a month, 31,000 a year. This summer, while kids were out of school, over 4,000 people, just this summer, died across this country from gun violence. And Madam President, I come down to the floor, not as often as I'd like, but as often as I can, to tell some of their stories. Because I kind of thought that these numbers would be enough to persuade members of this body to do something, anything, to try to stem the scourge of gun violence in this country, but it hasn't. And so my hope is maybe by telling the stories of some of these individuals, maybe that will make a difference. Every day we add dozens of stories of young men and women, mostly young men and women, whose lives were cut short, whose greatness we never were able to see, whose potential was never realized because they were killed by a gun. And this summer, we've been gripped by mass shooting after mass shooting. Cynthia Hurd, Tawanza Sanders, Sharonda Singleton, Myra Thompson, Ethel Lance, Susie Jackson, Daniel Simmons, DePayne Doctor, and Clementa Pickney. We know not all of those names, but many of them, because they were killed in a mass shooting at a church in South Carolina. Sergeant Carson Holmquist, Petty Officer 2nd Class Randall Smith, Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Sullivan, Lance Corporal Skip Wells, Staff Sergeant David Wyatt. Maybe you've heard of their names because they were all killed in a shooting in Tennessee at a Chattanooga Armed Forces Recruiting Center. Maybe you've heard of Jillian Johnson or Macy Bro, who were killed at a movie theater in Lafayette, Louisiana, in July of this year. Most people have heard now of Alison Parker and Adam Ward, who were gunned down on live TV just a few weeks ago in Virginia. But each one of those days, June 17th, the shooting in South Carolina, July 16th, the shooting in Tennessee, July 24th, the shooting in Louisiana, August 26th, the shooting in Virginia, every single one of those days where there were dozens more people who died from gunshot wounds that you never heard of. But they meant something to their families. Their loss is to this day experienced deeply by those who knew them well. Some of those were people that were close to us, those of us that serve in public service. Matthew Slansky was killed this summer in Washington, D.C. on August 15th. He was heading to a going-away party and he had just stepped out of a cab when he was shot outside of the Shaw Howard Metro station. He was the 6th gunshot victim in the Shaw area in a little over a week. Think about what that's like to live in a neighborhood in which you have 6 shootings over the course of a week. Think of the fear that that breeds in those communities. Well, we knew Matthew because he was an intern for one of our colleagues. He was currently working as a consultant at Deloitte, but he had served as a Senate intern. And he was a pretty amazing kid by all accounts. He had traveled the world. He spoke 2 languages. He was a star hockey player. His future was absolutely limitless. But because this city is awash in guns, many of them illegal, many of them in the hands of criminals who get them because of giant gaping holes in our background check system, Matthew Slansky is no longer with us, dead at the age of 23. Or how about the heartbreaking story of Carey Gabay, 43 years old. He was serving as an assistant counsel to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, and before that he had been counsel at the Empire State Development Corporation. He died on September 16th, just on the back end of the summer, after he was just caught in the crossfire of a shooting in New York City. He was an innocent bystander, and he was shot in the head while attending a pre-West Indian American Day parade festival with friends and family. He was the son of Jamaican immigrants, and he grew up in public housing in the Bronx. He had done amazingly well, gotten to go to Harvard University, attended Harvard Law School, was working for the governor, trying to make a better life, trying to give opportunities for kids who grew up in the circumstances that he did. A friend described him as an amazing human being who melded public service, professionalism, personal integrity with warmth and caring for everyone he knew. 43 years old, gunned down in broad daylight outside of a festival simply because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. 4,000 people this summer were killed by guns, and not a single public hearing has occurred in the United States Senate on a solution. There's not even mention of a debate happening anytime soon on the floor of the United States Senate as to how we stop these episodes of mass slaughter. You know, we're averaging more than 1 mass shooting in this country every single day this year. That's astounding. That's shocking. And yet, total, utter, absolute silence from the world's greatest deliberative body on what we do about it. Now, I will be the last person to tell you that there is any panacea coming from the United States Congress on how to stem gun violence. You are never going to be able to eliminate these epidemic rates of gun violence just by one law or a set of laws that are passed. But what is an absolute indictment of this place is that we don't even try. And I've made this contention on the floor before, and I'll make it again. I truly believe that our complicity, our silence on this has become complicity. That we have become accomplices to these murders because by saying nothing, by doing nothing, we offer up a kind of quiet endorsement to people who exist in the fringes of their mind, who are thinking about contemplating violence, and hear the leaders of this country doing absolutely nothing to seriously condemn or stop their destructive, malevolent behavior. Our silence has become complicity. And so I hope that at some point over the course of the rest of this year, we can begin a conversation here as to how we turn these numbers back in the right direction. There is no other country in the industrialized world who even comes close to these numbers. I can offer you a suggestion on where we start. If between now and December we can't come to a common understanding on our gun laws, I still don't understand, with 90% of Americans supporting expansive background checks, why we can't just do that. But if we can't get there, then let's start with fixing our mental health system. I think there's a lot of reasons why Adam Lanza walked into Sandy Hook Elementary School and killed 20 kids over 2 years ago. But the Child Advocate in Connecticut issued a damning report on his interactions with the mental health system. His mother tried and tried and tried, and in the end she gave up and let him retreat into the isolation of his room where he plotted these murders. But that family and that mother and that young man ran into barrier after barrier, obstacle after obstacle, trying to find a course of treatment for his very serious set of illnesses. Now, what we know is that people with mental illness are much more likely to be the victims of gun violence than the perpetrators of it. There's no inherent connection between being mentally ill and being violent. There's no greater incidence of mental illness in the United States than anywhere else in the world, and yet we have these epidemic rates of gun violence. But I'll certainly be the first one to admit that if we fix our mental health system, it will help lots of people who have no intersections with gun violence, but it will push these numbers downward. Because some of these people are committing these murders because they are not getting treatment for serious illnesses. So Senator Cassidy and I, who frankly don't agree on a lot, conservative Republican from the Deep South, a progressive Democrat from the Northeast, we've introduced a mental health reform measure that has broad bipartisan support, that would seek to break down these barriers that the seriously mentally ill have to care, that would try to get parents more involved in the care, especially of young adults, that would increase the capacity in our mental health treatment system, both outpatient and inpatient care. Maybe over the course of the rest of this year, at the very least, we can make a dent in the massive, massive shortfalls in our behavioral health system. The families that I've become so close with in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, who command me to come down to the floor every week or so and tell these stories, the voices of victims, they would like us to come together on a set of meaningful changes to our gun laws. They just don't understand why Adam Lanza was able to walk into this school with a gun that killed 20 little boys and girls in less than 5 minutes because of how powerful it was, because of the 30-round cartridges that he was able to use. But they don't want our inability to get action on gun laws to stop us from making other progress that would make the next Adam Lanza less likely. And so maybe we can do that. But we should do something. Our silence is an embarrassment after this summer of mass shootings. These news reports should command us to action, but we frankly shouldn't have had to wait for the news reports of shootings in Virginia or Louisiana or South Carolina, because these numbers were just as true last year as they are this year. Maybe there are more episodes of mass violence and mass shootings at headline grabbing atrocity, but these numbers, reflecting what's happening on the ground in New Haven, Connecticut, and Hartford, Connecticut, and Boston, Massachusetts, and Chicago, Illinois, and Los Angeles, this has been a reality for a long time. We should have woken up long ago, but maybe over the course of this year, we can make some progress so that moving forward, there are a few less voices of victims to bring to the floor of the Senate. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.